Welcome to B'Madzajic and Onindwa. This podcast is produced by the Communications Department at the Anishinaabeg Nation. We will be focusing on the issues and initiatives in Anishinaabeg Nation territory. I'm your host, Lisa Abel. This podcast is the third of a four-part series exploring Two-Spirit-themed topics we've created in collaboration with members of the Anishinaabeg Nation's Two-Spirit, Two-Heart Indigenous Queer Nation Advisory Council. In our first episode, we learned that many Indigenous languages had words embracing Two-Spirit people. We also learned about terminology that's coming into use, such as Two-Hearted and Indigiqueer. In our second episode, we talked about the traditional roles and responsibilities Two-Spirit people held in our communities, including facilitating ceremonies, mediation, matchmaking, and bringing people together. Over time, Two-Spirit people are reclaiming their roles with the help of mentors, parental figures, and communities of support. In this episode, we will hear part of the conversation I had with Nawaka Gijimigwan and Aaron Bowerman about homophobia and how it can be addressed. Nawaka describes homophobia as a shroud lingering over some First Nations communities. Experiencing homophobia and exclusion from family or community can be devastating to a two-hearted person's physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual health. Nawaka and Aaron will share how we can address homophobia through the use of inclusive language and policies, by ensuring that Two-Spirit people are welcome at ceremony, and by supporting Two-Spirit youth. Nawaka Gijimigwan Longfeather, also known as Lyndon George, is a member of the Chippewas of Kettle and Stony Point First Nation. They live in Hamilton in the Dish with One Spoon Treaty Territory. Nawaka Gijimigwan is Anishinaabe Ojokwe, a Two-Spirit term which translates as wise woman. Nawaka Gijimigwan currently works in the justice field and has worked with Indigenous people all of their life, both on and off reserve. Aaron Bowerman identifies as an Anishinaabe Two-Spirit man. He was born and raised in Shigwinda First Nation on Manitoulin Island. Aaron is an Indigenous Research Associate with the City of Toronto and is passionate about harm reduction, 2S LGBTQIA+ issues, HIV/AIDS, and social determinants of health within Indigenous communities. It's kind of a tough start today. The other two topics we wanted to talk about was homophobia and health.
On the topic of homophobia, I feel that it's extremely important to remind our relatives that homophobia is a construct that is not Indigenous, that in our ways of life and our ways of being, there is no such thing as homophobia, when in fact, most of our very root belief systems, our grassroots movements have always been that nobody gets left behind. And that means Indigenous queer, Indigiqueer, Two-Spirit, Two-Hearted people were part of that movement forward as well. And I believe that it's extremely important in the education around Two-Spirit, Indigiqueer, Indigenous queer, Two-Heart people. We remind our relatives that that construct is somebody else's construct and it does not belong in any of our systems. We've each gone through all these different circumstances in acts of oppression within our own community, that being Two-Spirit, Two-Heart, Indigiqueer, Indigenous queer in our community was no exception. And we still see forms of homophobia that happen into our communities. It's going to take some time for us to, again, realize that Indigenous queer, Indigiqueer, Two-Spirit, Two-Heart people have a seat within our circles. So I feel that it's going to take a little bit of time, but it also means we can't always put all of the work on Two-Spirit, Two-Heart, Indigiqueer, Indigenous queer folks to do all the work. Our relatives have to pick up some of the burden of correcting those forms of harmful colonization and genocide that were forced on us. And that's at least acknowledging that homophobia is not our construct. And then opening up the doors and allowing us to reclaim our spaces within those circles, and to be very mindful of how the words that we use, the words that we choose to put out in the universe have power. And to be careful and understand that when we put those words out there, and I'm referring to those hateful kind of terms, that words like fag and faggot. And so those terms can still be very damaging and be very harmful. We have to be aware of gendering language as well, as it can exclude two-spirit, two-heart, Indigenous queer, Indigiqueer people from many of our circles and from many of our conversations. And to be sure that we're not going to be doing anything that is going to exclude any members of our circles, and to use gender neutral language like I have talked about before, and how I'm using when I'm speaking, and I use the term relatives quite often. So it's very important for us to look at those. It's important for us to look at policies and protocols that we have in our communities, our First Nations communities, our Inuit communities, our Métis communities, that those policies and procedures and protocols are not reflecting those types of homophobic structures that come from somewhere else. And that includes language, that we're not excluding anybody from having access to services and resources based on who we are in terms of our gender and gender identity. And I think that that really needs to apply to our communities, that are the communities where we have not only traditional Indigenous believers, but also the communities that have Judeo-Christian believers, or Catholic believers. Many of those foreign religions and spiritual beliefs have constructs of homophobia, and we have to be careful to not force those foreign structures or foreign constructs onto our people, onto our two spirits in the communities, and that they don't influence policy and protocols in our communities, and particularly around matters that are significant, important to Indigenous people, and that's ceremonies. That we don't restrict, based on homophobia, access to ceremony for two-spirit people. Because we have seen a lot of this homophobia and how it restricts Indigenous queer two-spirit folks in accessing traditional ways of life, traditional ways of being, specifically ceremony. And quite often that would look like skirt shaming for people. So when two-spirit people show up to ceremony and a male gendered two-spirit person is wearing a skirt, we must always be mindful of the fact that we do not own ceremony, and that we don't get to restrict who's accessing ceremony, that our role and responsibility is to make sure that our relatives feel welcome at ceremony regardless of what they're wearing. Where in fact, historically, two-spirit Indigenous queer folks who might present as male often wore female regalia, or the female presenting relatives may have worn male regalia to various ceremonies. We have to always remember that nobody gets left behind in those circumstances as well, particularly with ceremony. And we need to recondition our thinking to include two-spirit, Indigenous queer, Indigiqueer, two-hearted people, and welcome them back into all of our ceremonies. Because as I have stated before, as Murray Sinclair had stated, that when two-spirit people conduct or even present in ceremony, our ceremonies are much more stronger and much more spiritual. So let's let it happen organically. Let's make that shift back to our ways of life and our ways of being. And let's get rid of those constructs that have caused either confusion or great harm in our communities. And homophobia is one of those.
Miigwech, you talked about interpersonal ways homophobia might manifest itself in the community, like in ceremony, and then you mentioned also organizations, their policies or protocols or procedures. In what way would we understand homophobia in that sense, from an organizational sense?
From an organizational sense, we'd be talking about specifically gendering language that does not include our two-spirit, two-heart, indigenous queer family members, our relatives. So specifically sticking to the he-she construct, right? So in all those policies, they talk specifically about he or she shall not take a day off of work without contacting the supervisor, or he and she shall not have access to, and then looking at the forms of homophobia within their physical structures by not having things like accessible bathrooms for our trans and trans identifying relatives, so that they feel safe and comfortable in their own space as well. So I think also as well, we have to be mindful of the fact that many of the two-spirit, two-hearted, indigenous queer folks have often been ostracized out of their families, have been kicked out of the family home after they have come out of the closet, or after they have started their journey to better understanding who they are as a queer individual. And so when we move into the urban centers or into other space, we have to create our own families. We have to start a new family. And so we then maneuver through life finding people who genuinely care, people who are providing for us the love and support that we need as well as human beings, and they become part of our family. Policies around bereavement and family constructs that are based on Eurocentric constructs of family and bereavement have excluded those family constructs for indigenous queer two-spirit people. And it's important for us to learn and retain knowledge about how our constructs of family are different, and then making sure that anybody who has had to create a new family is being offered the same privileges that everybody else is in terms of bereavement, etc.
When you say bereavement, I'm understanding you're talking about allowing a two-spirit person's chosen family being able to attend to them. Would this also mean that if a two-spirit person were sick, then allowing their chosen family to also be at the hospital with them?
Both. I use the example of bereavement because it's one of the best examples that also restricts Indigenous people. Because if we look around at bereavement policies with many Indigenous agencies, organizations, and communities, they're going to be basing those protocols and policies on somebody else's construct of family. They're not going to take into consideration our traditional forms of family. For instance, we have many mums. So my mom's sisters are my mums, and they carry the same roles and responsibilities that my mom does. And that as a sibling, having 10 siblings, I am an auntie, uncle, a mom or dad to all of those nieces and nephews. Our first cousins are our siblings, and that we carry those roles and responsibilities to those many siblings that we have. And because our constructs of family are different when we adopt and when we carry bereavement policies that reflect Eurocentric construct of family, we're not awarded the privilege of being able to successfully grieve for those members of our family under our traditional construct of family. So That's what I'm talking about in terms. So when we talk about Indigenous queer two-spirit people, for instance, I have my family back home who is supportive, but I live 2.5 hours away from my community. In the city of Hamilton here, I have my family here too. I have my queer family here. I have my Indigenous family here. And so those policies around bereavement, should I lose somebody who is just as loving and just as supportive as my biological family, need to be recognized as well. And that is extremely important for two-spirit Indigenous queer folks who have had to flee from abusive, violent communities or families, or didn't have that option because they were kicked out of their family structures because they came out as queer. So that's what I'm talking about in terms of those homophobic kind of policies and the actions that are joined with them.
I think the other thing I'm wondering, do you feel that experiences of homophobia can impact two-spirit people, at different periods in their life, youth or as adults or as elders? Does it impact in different ways?
Well, for me, I think, yeah, I think definitely. I think homophobia never really goes away. I don't think, even as someone who's very comfortable with my sexuality, and I could hear someone talking about me or someone calling me a fag, and I try not to let it bother me, but sometimes it does still bother you, and I don't think that'll ever go away. But I think homophobia for me, I think it's, especially when you're young, it causes a lot of health issues. I think it pushes us to stay in the closet. When they had those protests, those religious groups were having those protests, I think, and that was challenging, talking about gender and trans folks in schools. I think those types of policies and those views cause a lot of health issues. They cause a lot of suicide. They're preventing people from talking about sexual health, which in result is going to cause more unplanned pregnancy, more HIV rates, more STBBIs. Homophobia, to me, I think causes people to have a lot of violence and a lot of isolation. And I think being isolated and, either from your families, causes a lot of relationship issues. It causes depression. How are we supposed to know how healthy relationships are when our own parents are not there for us? They get homophobic and we get kicked out. We end up being homeless. We end up getting depression, and then also when that happens, we tend to do things that help us ease the pain, which can lead to many addiction issues. Lyndon, mentioned that we find our own, we're forced to find our own communities and our own families, our chosen families. Well, sometimes that also includes groups of people who are also addicted, because they are also ones that are going to support us. It's, if I'm looking for a community and I'm using, well, a community that's also using is going to be super supportive for me. And so that causes a lot of issues. And I think, homophobia is just one of those pieces that causes so much health issues, and I think for me, I think the biggest issue with homophobia is the health issues that it causes down the line for many people, especially drug use, depression, suicide.
Yeah, I just want to agree with Aaron that it doesn't matter how old I get, but when I hear it would be negligent of me to not acknowledge that there are times where when somebody is coming from an extreme place of hate and is in a mindset that looks like that hate is driving them to be violent, and they start screaming out those hateful words, sometimes that does hurt. particularly when it's coming from somebody whom I've known for a period of time or whom I believe to be somebody who cared about who I am. And that's almost anybody in my community. So that's a whole big bunch of people, because we talk about, as Indigenous people, we talk about nurturing our communities, taking care of one another, taking care of our young people. But when it breaks down to the application on the ground, when the feet are on the ground, are we really doing that? And sometimes we're not. And it's going to take a long time, I feel, for us to get through homophobia completely in our communities, just because so many members in our communities have adopted foreign ways of being that include homophobia. Along my journey as well, I have noticed that many people, not just Two-Spirit people, but other of our relatives as well, that when we have come from a place in our families or our communities where we're not getting the love and the support that we want, it sometimes becomes very difficult for people to understand the difference between what is sex and what is love. And so that often people will think that having sex with many different people means that all of those different people you're having sex with love you. And that's how, when Aaron's talking about the consequences in health from homophobia, that's one of the things that I've noticed and that I've acknowledged in many of the Two-Spirit folks that I've known throughout the years, is that they've had that difficulty telling the difference between what is sex and what is love. And so looking for, and how that seemed to have breakdown is people are just looking for others to love them and to support them and to encourage them. And sometimes that means turning to sex, turning to drugs, turning to alcohol, because in that substance use, their families as well. So you can have your family or your circle of friends that you drink with. You can have your family or circle of friends that you smoke weed with. You can have your family and circle of friends that you do coke with, and so on and so on. And you find a way to equate that to the love and support that you feel that you need in order to move forward. And of course, we know that there has always been an elevated rate within our young people in terms of suicide, particularly when they're at that very vulnerable stage in their lives where they're questioning and trying to figure out who they are in terms of their gender and gender identity. And when you have that constant message that things like I talked about, how the church was telling us that if you were a homosexual, you're going to burn in hell. And in that story, so with many very young people who are questioning or trying to figure out their gender identity, that stuff's very stressful and it plays a very important role. And then you don't feel that you're wanted, you don't feel like you're loved, you don't feel like you're supported. So why go ahead and move forward? That always reminds me of the life cycle for what happens with Indigenous people who are growing up, or Indigenous queer folks who are growing up hearing that kind of rhetoric, that kind of harm, that homosexuality is bad, and you're bad, you're going to go to hell. And so you think you're automatically going to go to hell and you're a bad person anyway. So why not amplify being bad and do all kinds of destructive stuff to yourself? So that's what that reminded me of, is how easy it is for us when we're ostracized and ridiculed in our communities to maybe have wanted to adopt that kind of lifestyle, that where we would continually want to create harm for ourselves. And that's all from homophobia. It's all from a construct which is not ours.
Chi-miigwech to Aaron and Nawaka for taking part in the podcast and for your honest discussion about the impacts of homophobia as well as ways it can be addressed. And Chi-miigwech for the reminder that we all have a responsibility to help correct homophobic attitudes and policies that may exist in our communities. In the next episode of this series, we'll be talking about Two-Spirit Health and how we can ensure that our First Nations health services are providing safe care for our two-hearted relatives. As mentioned, Nawalka and Aaron are members of the Anishinaabeg Nation's Two-Spirit, Two-Heart Indigenous Queer Nation Advisory Council. If you or someone you know is interested in learning about and supporting this important work, please contact the Anishinaabeg Nation Special Projects Coordinator. Find the link in the podcast description. This episode includes the tracks Brothers by Wolf Saga and Chippewa Travelers, and Where the Road Meets the Sky by Justin DeLorme, licensed by Nagamo Publishing. Chi-miigwech for listening to this episode of Bamadzijig Ganonindwa. Until next time, Bama Pi.